Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. It is time for my top 5 games of E3 2017. Plus, we're actually going to talk about just a couple more. Now, before we get into this, I want you to know how I look at games. I'm not one of these people who just are simply looking at the AAAs and that's all I look at. I look at every single game. Indie games are, in particular, there's been a lot of really, really good indie games that have come out, in the last 5 years. So that's definitely a category or area that everybody needs to look at. And this is also going to be in no particular order, just 5 of the top games that I saw at E3. So let's go ahead and kick this off with Middle-earth: Shadow of War. If you don't know, this is actually the sequel to Middle-earth: Shadow of Mordor. That was a game that came out and was just absolutely fantastic. They introduced something new called the Nemesis system, and this is a new game mode or mechanic, whatever you want to call it, that it had never been done before. So for Shadow of War, they're basically taking everything that was done in Middle-earth: Shadow of Mordor, and they're just cranking it up to an 11 or doing a 2.0 version of it. But being able to actually corrupt these orcs and build an army based around that and customizing the whole thing is going to be really, really cool. And if you're kind of unfamiliar with this Nemesis system, there are a lot of key points into it. But one of the really cool things was that, let's say you get into a battle with an orc, and let's say you cut off his arm, you throw him into a fire and burn him, or something like that, and then let's say he actually escapes. When you fight a second time, or maybe even a third time, he will actually tell you, or he'll recall what happened in the previous fight. He'll be like, "How dare you, Ranger? You burned me last time we met. Now I'm going to kill you, blah, blah, blah." Or the other thing that can happen is the orcs can actually kill you, and the one that kills you, gets the killing blow, actually gets promoted and gets stronger within the orc society. So you could potentially have an issue where you have this Nemesis, hence the name of the system, where this one orc keeps killing you and keeps getting promoted and keeps getting stronger and stuff. So they're basically taking all that, like I said, and just improving upon it. And the first game had what is basically the Arkham combat system, and it looks like they're pretty much sticking with that, but again, just making it better overall. But that game looks, Shadow of War looks absolutely fantastic. And I think that one is slated for October, I think, off the top of my head. So that one looks just absolutely fantastic. Next, let's go ahead and move on to The Last Night. And this is indeed one of these indie games. Now, this one is really interesting and really unusual. I actually have talked to several people about this one, and I've actually heard from several other big gamers. Nobody has ever seen a game like this before. Now, there is an art style that is called pixel art, so it's kind of like that, but then in some scenes, it's almost like they're mixing the pixel art style with a more realistic style. And it's very unusual. And like I said, everybody that I've talked to, nobody's seen anything like this game. Now, what exactly do you do in the game? It's unclear at this time because there's just very limited information on it. But it's definitely one that you'll want to keep your eye on. And so that one is The Last Night. Number 3 on the list is going to be State of Decay 2. Now, I will say that I never actually played the first one, and the whole zombie game thing is something that is really, really overdone at this point. I mean, at E3 2017 alone, there was probably 5 to 7 zombie games shown, if not more. But State of Decay 2 does this whole zombie thing a little bit different. It's not your standard shooter, and in fact, it's actually more of a base building game than it is an actual shooter, although you do have elements of that as well. But it's your job to actually run a community and to build upon that. you actually have to like manage relationships, manage morale. You even have to manage like the noise level of the community. If you're actually going to say, okay, I'm going to build these new buildings, well, that's the construction of that is actually going to create a lot of noise. And can you afford making that much noise, having the zombies come in and attack your community? Do you have the stuff, the equipment, the guns, ammo? Do you have the stuff you need to actually defend it? And in addition to that, it's like all of the characters are randomly generated. They all have like their own quirks, their own stories. You know, who do you bring in? Who do you leave out? Do you kill some? Do you keep some? It's also got full co-op, which is really cool. There's one mechanic in particular where you can be kind of in your own game, and let's say you're in trouble, you can actually fire up a flare into the sky, and that actually sends out sort of a message in the system to other players that you need help in your game. They can then join you and help you out, which is really cool. Now, one thing that was mentioned is I saw an interview and some people were saying, can you and a friend just straight up work together and do this together? And the answer is kind of. Each of you will have your own, instance or game, whatever you want to call it. So if you actually want to do the full thing with, a partner, you basically can only play the game when you're both online at the same time in the same instance or same shard and all that. But yeah, overall, State of Decay 2 just looks really interesting. And like I said, it's not your standard sort of zombie game, so I thought that one looked pretty cool. Number 4 on my list was a game called BattleTech. And I believe this is actually going to be a game that is based on a board game. But what really struck me on this one is it's sort of turn-based mech combat. So you actually build and customize these mechs. And in addition to that, like back at your base or back at your ship, there's like a big map. It's almost like a galaxy map. And it's like you can go to and sort of claim these locations and fight on these different locations and stuff. And it looks really interesting. And then the mechs themselves actually have a bunch of subsystems. So it's like you can knock the individual weapon systems and arms and legs and different things off of the enemy mechs. And it just overall, just the overall like art style and aesthetic and gameplay, what they showed, and this was actually showed at the PC Gaming Conference as well. It just looked really interesting to me, and it really just sort of popped out. So that is BattleTech, and then the final one for my top 5 is going to be the next David Cage game called Detroit Become Human. And if you're unfamiliar with David Cage, or I think his company's called Quantic Dream or something like that, they are known for doing these very unusual games that have a lot of like really branching story arcs. They did one called Heavy Rain as an example, where you're actually playing multiple characters at the same time. If one dies, then they're done, and their part of the story is over. And I think Detroit Become Human is going to be doing that as well, to where you're actually playing multiple characters and you're able to actually shape your own story based on like detective work and decisions, and the whole world just changes based on what you do. And this one is future based, and it's going to be about like an android revolution against humans and what side do you take, and just overall it looks pretty cool. So jumping into a few other games here real quick, I actually put out a message on Twitter asking my Twitter followers, what other games do you guys want me to just sort of talk about? And I've got 3 games that came up from a few people. The first one is, of course, Star Wars Battlefront 2. Everybody wants to know my thoughts and opinions on that one. The first one was very much rushed. I think the hype level was really high for that one. It then came out, and we discovered it didn't have a campaign. It was missing a ton of modes. It was only sort of the one Star Wars era, and overall, I thought the gameplay was extremely generic. It was a very mediocre game for me. And so now we have Star Wars Battlefront 2. The devs have actually confirmed that they've heard everybody's feedback, and I think they're going to finally try and make this one the Battlefront that we've always wanted. It's got the story mode, and the story mode is going to be canon, all eras, space combat is back, a lot more game modes, and just, they did mention that all future maps and heroes are going to be free, which is fantastic. I think they took that from Titanfall 2. They learned a lot of lessons from that, saying, okay, you can't really split up the player base with all these different maps. You just cannot do that. So I'm going to tell you right now that my hype level for Battlefront 2 is basically 0. Because at this point, they have to prove themselves. They messed up with that first one by rushing it out. So for this one, of course I'm going to buy it. I'll probably have it early, and we'll play it. We'll stream it. I'll probably do the story mode on YouTube. That's kind of what I'm thinking at the moment. But yeah, I have 0 hype for this because they have to prove themselves. Next up, people wanted me to talk about Assassin's Creed Origins. This is a series that they came out with almost every single year, and then last year they finally took a break, which I'm really, really happy about. Now, in the early games, Assassin's Creed was actually run by Jade Raymond over at Ubisoft, and I played the first several. I think I played 1, 2, Revelations, and 3 maybe. I played like the first 3 or 4, but then after that, the series just got way too repetitive for me, and I didn't play like the last 4 or 5 or however many they're up to at this point. But this Assassin's Creed, you can tell they're changing things. They use that extra time to put together something that's a little bit different. They are actually doing a leveling system. They're doing like a full loot system with gear and upgrades. And it's almost coming across more like Witcher or a very RPG-esque type game like that compared to perhaps the other Assassin's Creed games. So personally, I'm down for another Assassin's Creed. Absolutely. I think I'll definitely be getting this one. And the setting in Egypt is very cool. And timeline-wise, I think they're actually saying that this one, you know, why they're calling it Origins, of course, but this one is now going to be the first one sort of in the timeline, so you get to kind of see how everything was put together. And I believe that this game is not going to have any of the, and I'm trying to remember the name of the company. I think it's like Abstergo or something like that. But it's, you know, where you're playing like the human person, and then they go into the machine, and then they're in Assassin's Creed. I think they're not doing any of the outside machine stuff, which is pretty cool. Hopefully they're done with that. And then finally, the last game I will talk about is actually the new Spider-Man, the PS4 Spider-Man. The gameplay trailer they showed for that was very, very impressive. It was an incredible, like, cinematic experience, but there was a lot of questions regarding that as well. It's like, well, is that how the game is really going to be? Is it going to be more open world? You know, what's really the gameplay going to be like? Because most of what they showed in that gameplay trailer was just basically one giant cutscene almost. And, you know, an interactive cutscene with QTEs and stuff. And to a certain degree, that is okay, but you really want that Spider-Man game to where you can explore the world, explore the city. And I know one of the biggest issues with previous Spider-Man games is when he's actually web-slinging around the world. You know, you would basically do this or whatever, and you would just connect to the sky, and you'd be able to swing. I think it was Spider-Man 2 back on, I don't know, the PlayStation or PlayStation 2 or whatever it was, who actually did it correctly, and it appears that this game is also doing it correctly. You could see that when he was moving along, like, very quickly, there was, like, all these little circle things, and that's where you could actually web-sling to. So it looks like they're actually doing proper web-slinging, building connections, which is going to be pretty cool. But overall, that game, what we saw of it, that game looked great. The animations, the combat. And again, this game is also using that Arkham-like combat a little bit, but they're sort of doing the Spider-Man version of it, if you want to call it that. But yeah, I think that that's pretty much going to cover this top 5 list. But yeah, it was overall E3 this year was it was kind of average. The last several years, E3 has been just amazing, year after year after year. Sony in particular has just knocked it out of the park the last 2 or 3 years. So going into E3 this year, I was kind of like, I don't know if they can keep doing it, and they couldn't. There was still a lot of good stuff, but just not to the degree of the last couple of years. But yeah, I'm really happy with the way that all of my E3 coverage turned out. If you guys haven't watched the press conferences, I've put all of them except for Microsoft on my channel. You know, we co-streamed all the press events. Novik and Darth Shady joined me for a couple of them. So if you want to see myself do sort of live commentary of those press events, definitely check those out on the channel. But yeah, ladies and gentlemen, I think that'll go ahead and do it. So thank you all so much for watching. If you have any comments or questions, please leave them below. Everybody keep playing, have fun, and we'll see you next time.